Charts. C.1. A table of intervals. Okay, this is just a general review of a comprehensive review of all of the intervals that we have covered. I'm going to run through a quick review and take you through these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start where you should be starting anytime you're altering intervals, forming them, or naming them, as we discussed, with the diatonic intervals, meaning the ones naturally occurring from the major scale. In C major, just for transparency, it can be really from any scale, But here, we have our perfect prime, or perfect 1, right? This one, you can see, increasing in size this way, and decreasing in size this way. Like I said, it's easier to think of it as increasing in size as becoming expanded on the top or the bottom, or collapsing in on the top or the bottom going this way, right? So here, it's your perfect prime. To augment it or expand it, you can take this one and take it up a half step. So you get this for an augmented prime. Here's your major second, right? If you want to make it a minor second, all you have to do, you can do it one of two ways. You can take your major second here and then take the top note, D. See, here's this. You can take the top note, D, take it down a half step. So you have your minor second like this, or you have your major second like this, and you can collapse it in on the bottom note like this. C or C natural. You can raise it a half step. So you get that minor second. So here's your major second. To augment it or expand it, watch this. You can expand it on the D by increasing that by a half step. So you will have this. It's an augmented second. Back to your major second. You can also expand it by taking that bottom note C and making it flat. There's an augmented second. Make sure, see how it is like this? It's still, though, a second distance away. Another good review, if you remember how to form intervals, naming them, what we learned as well, you'll learn that there's 3 steps to creating and naming an interval. It begins with the number, right? Finding the number distance, 1, 2, 3. A third, and then diatonic, making sure that it's the diatonic notes of the scale, which it is. And then from that point on, accidentals, finding out the accidentals to form the quality or to name the quality through the accidentals, right? So here is your major third. If we want to make it minor, we can collapse it in on the top by a half step, taking that E down a half step. And if we want to make it diminished from that minor third, then take a double flat. We'll collapse it in by another half note, and there's your diminished third. So back to your major third. We can also make it minor by collapsing the bottom note in, taking it up a half step. C sharp and E. There's a minor third as well. And we can diminish it further either by, not pictured, taking that C and making it a double sharp, like that. See, going from this to a D double sharp and E, not pictured, or going from this minor third, C sharp and E, and then collapsing the top note in 1 as well, right? Like this. There's your diminished third there. Back to a major third, the diatonic notes of the scale. Here's your major third. To augment it, you can take the top note, expand it out by a half step. Augmented third right there. Or you can take the major third, diatonic notes, and collapse the bottom note down to achieve an augmented third, like this, by a half step. So here is your perfect fourth. Notice that 1s, 4s, 5s, and 8s are your perfect intervals, and they can only become diminished or augmented. So your perfect fourth, to make it diminished, we can take the top note and collapse it down by a half step right here. That's for your diminished fourth right there. Here is your perfect fourth again. We can make it diminished as well by taking the bottom note and collapsing it in by a half step, as you can see here, raising that fourth the bottom one in. Here's your perfect fourth again. We can make it augmented by taking the top note and expanding it outwards by a half step, making what we call a tritone, an augmented fourth, right, or diminished fifth. Here's your perfect fourth again. We can make it an augmented fourth by taking the bottom note and expanding it outwards by a half step. So you'd like to see how that works? Here's your perfect fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like this. And your perfect fifth, like this. If you want to make it diminished, once again, we can take the top note and take it down a half step. Diminished fifths, also a tritone. Back to your perfect fifth. You can also make it diminished by taking your bottom note and collapsing it in by a half step. Same diminished fifth. Here's your perfect fifth again. We can make this an augmented perfect fifth by taking the top note and expanding it out by a half step, right? Or taking your perfect fifth and expanding the bottom note out by a half step. That would be an augmented fifth because it's still, the notes are still in the position of the fifth. Remember, number, diatonic, articulation. Here's our major sixth, right? These are very good ones to illustrate with. Because a major sixth, you can notice, we can take the top note down a half step. It will become a minor sixth. We can take it down from a minor sixth. We can take the top note down another half step, noted by the double flat, flatted twice. And there's your diminished sixth right here. Let's go back to major sixth. You can make your major sixth a minor sixth by collapsing it in once by a half step on the bottom, right? Then, not pictured as the double flat, it can also be a diminished sixth by taking the bottom note in a second time with the double sharp, right? And not pictured. Or, here's your minor sixth. We can take our minor sixth again, and then we can collapse, after the bottom note is collapsed in by a half step, we can collapse the top note in by a half step. And there is your diminished sixth, right here. Still the spacing of a sixth. Back to our major sixth. Diatonic notes, where you want to start on, normally. And your major sixth, we can augment expand that top note out by a half step. There's your augmented sixth, right? Right there. Your major sixth, we can take the bottom note and use a flat to expand the bottom note out by a half step. There's your augmented sixth again. And major sixth. So here's your major seventh. Right here. The major seventh, we can make it minor by taking the diatonic notes, taking the top note down by a half step. And there's your minor sixth, right? If we want to make that minor seventh, sorry about that. If we want to make your minor seventh, then a diminished seventh, we can take that top note down again by another half step, noted by the double flat. There's your diminished seventh. Let's go back to the major seventh. We can make our major seventh a minor seventh by taking the bottom note in, collapsing it in a half step with the sharp. We can also do that by make it a diminished seventh from that minor seventh by collapsing it in with a double sharp, not pictured. Or from our minor seventh, we can take and make it diminish by after collapsing the bottom in by a half step, collapsing the top in by a half step, looking like this. That is your diminished seventh, right? Back to your major seventh, right? We can now make major seventh augmented by expanding the top note by a half step, right? Like this. Also make sure you're keying in over here so you can see visually what's going on. So there's your major seventh, and then expanding the top note out by a sharp, by a half step. And like that, there's your augmented seventh. Or taking a major seventh and expanding the bottom note out by a half step. Getting this. There's another augmented seventh for you. And now we have a perfect octave, our last interval that you can create. And we have our perfect octave. We can make it diminished from a perfect octave by taking the top note down a half step, as you see here. Diminished octave, right? Here's our perfect octave. We can also make it diminished by taking the bottom note in and raising it and collapsing it in by a half step, like that. That's still your diminished octave. Notice how you still have the notes in the octave distance. So there it is. There's all of your intervals. This is a very good resource and that you can adhere back to if you're questioning intervals or if you have questions over intervals. This is a really good resource, like I said. And remember, you can't go wrong. Remember the 3 rules forming and naming intervals. Diatonic, right? Number is the first one. Number, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then diatonic, making sure it's in this diatonic position before you name it or create it. And then articulations. So number is number 1, diatonic is number 2, and articulations is number 3. By articulations, I mean sharps and flats, changing the quality of the interval. To have the number name, you have to first have the number distance, right? To get the number name. And then you want to put it in the diatonic notes, right? Diatonic. And then to get the quality name, right? Like minor, augmented, or diminished. That is when you use articulations. Okay, number, diatonic, articulations.